Hannah had stopped believing in beginnings. They were a convenient myth people used to make sense of things that only became meaningful later, when memories softened the edges and arranged moments into something that looked intentional. Life, as she knew it, rarely announced itself. It happened quietly, then asked to be understood long after the fact. That afternoon, the rain came down without warning. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no wind tearing at the street, but persistent, soaking, the kind that slipped beneath collars and dampened resolve. Hannah had been walking home from work, mind half occupied with the familiar ache of routine, when she gave in and stepped into the nearest open doorway. A bookshop. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, the sound oddly intimate, as though she'd been noticed. Warmth wrapped around her immediately, the dry, comforting smell of old paper and wood polish, of dust that had settled into corners undisturbed for decades. She stood there for a moment, letting the rain drip from her coat, listening to the muted hush that only independent bookshops seemed to hold. The world outside felt far away, softened by glass and time. That was when she saw Claire. She was standing by the poetry shelves, turned slightly away, one foot braced casually against the lower bookcase. Her posture suggested someone unguarded, absorbed. She held a book open in both hands, brow faintly furrowed, lips parted just enough to suggest she might be mouthing the words silently. Hannah noticed details without trying to. The sleeves of Claire's jumper were pushed up, revealing forearms marked faintly with ink smudges, the kind left behind by someone who still wrote by hand. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, not styled so much as allowed. There was a stillness about her that felt deliberate, chosen. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Not desire. Not yet. Recognition. It unsettled her precisely because it didn't demand anything. It simply existed, as though something long dormant had been gently touched awake. Claire looked up then, perhaps sensing the attention. Their eyes met. The moment stretched, not long enough to be uncomfortable, but long enough to register. Claire's gaze was steady, curious rather than assessing. Hannah realized with a strange clarity that she was being seen, not scanned. Claire smiled, not broadly, not performatively, but in a way that softened her face. Hannah felt absurdly exposed. She turned away first, pretending sudden interest in a nearby display, heart beating harder than the situation warranted. She told herself it was nothing, just a stranger in a quiet place, just a moment her mind was misinterpreting. But when Claire spoke, it was as though the thought had already been answered. "Sorry," she said gently. "Do you know if this one's any good?" Hannah turned back. Claire held up the book slightly, as if offering it into shared space. Poetry. A slim volume, the kind people bought either because they were desperate or because they were hopeful. "I haven't read it," Hannah replied honestly. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "But I think poetry's more about timing than quality." Claire considered this, then laughed softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't guarded. It was the laugh of someone surprised by an idea they liked. "That's actually comforting," she said. "I keep thinking I should love poetry more than I do. Maybe you just haven't met the right poem yet." Claire's smile widened. "Or the right day." They stood there talking, then, about books abandoned halfway through, about stories that lingered long after the last page, about the strange intimacy of reading someone else's thoughts alone in a crowded room. Hannah learned that Claire came to the shop often but never with a list. Claire learned that Hannah preferred essays to novels but wished she didn't. They spoke about rain. About silence. About nothing that would later seem important, except that everything did. When the rain finally eased, Hannah glanced toward the door with reluctance she tried not to show. "I should go," she said. Claire nodded, disappointment flickering across her face before she masked it. "Yes. Me too." They hesitated, standing too close now, the air between them charged with something unnamed. "Well," Claire said. "It was nice meeting you." "Yeah," Hannah replied. "It was." They didn't exchange numbers. They didn't promise anything. When Hannah stepped back into the street, the rain had thinned to a mist. She walked home slowly, the weight of the encounter settling in her chest, not heavy, but present. She told herself it was nothing. But later that night, lying awake, she realized something had already begun. Not a love story. A question. Hannah woke the next morning with the quiet, persistent sense that something had shifted overnight. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rush of memory or sudden clarity. Just a faint awareness, like a sound she couldn't quite place, a note humming beneath the ordinary noise of her day. She noticed it while brushing her teeth, while tying her shoes, while standing at the bus stop watching rainwater gather and slide along the curb. She told herself it was nothing. She had lived long enough to know that brief encounters sometimes lingered longer than they deserved. Memory was generous that way, capable of elevating small moments into symbols. A woman in a bookshop did not mean anything on its own. And yet, at work, Hannah found herself distracted in ways she wasn't used to anymore. She taught literature at a local college, an environment she had once found energizing but now navigated with practiced ease. Her students noticed when she paused mid-sentence, gaze unfocused, as if she were listening for something just out of reach. She blamed lack of sleep. Still, when a student asked her to recommend a book of poetry, Hannah hesitated, then smiled to herself at the coincidence. She suggested something safe, something she knew well. But later, alone in her office, she wondered what Claire would have chosen instead. The thought startled her. She didn't know Claire. Not really. She knew the curve of her smile, the sound of her laugh, the way she held a book like it mattered. Those were impressions, not facts. And yet they had slipped easily into her inner life, making themselves at home. Hannah had always been susceptible to that, to the idea of people rather than their reality. It was one of the reasons she had learned caution. In her 20s, she had fallen in love quickly and often, mistaking intensity for intimacy. She had chased women who burned brightly and briefly, women who spoke in absolutes and vanished at the first sign of complication. Each ending had taught her something, though she hadn't always wanted the lesson. By her late 30s, she had become careful. Wanting, she had learned, had a shape. It began as curiosity, sharpened into anticipation, and, if left unchecked, expanded into longing. Hannah had spent years learning how to interrupt that progression before it overtook her. She knew how to redirect her thoughts, how to ground herself in routine, how to let moments pass without assigning them meaning. She had thought she was done wanting. That afternoon, she found herself walking a longer route home, passing the bookshop without quite admitting why. The rain had returned, softer this time, the sky heavy with it. She slowed as she approached the familiar doorway, heart beating just a little faster than necessary. The bell chimed when she entered. Claire was not there. Hannah felt a small, irrational pang of disappointment. She wandered the aisles aimlessly, fingers trailing along spines, pretending she had come for a reason. She picked up a book of essays she already owned, then put it back. The shop felt different now, emptier, less charged. She stayed longer than she meant to, as if waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. On her way out, she caught her reflection in the glass, brow furrowed, mouth set in a line she didn't recognize. She laughed quietly at herself. Get a grip, she thought. You spoke to a stranger. But over the following days, Claire continued to appear in her thoughts, uninvited and unannounced. Hannah remembered the ink on her hands, the gentleness of her voice. She imagined her life in fragments, where she lived, what she did, what she loved when she wasn't standing in a bookshop talking to women she might never see again. She wondered, absently, whether Claire loved women at all. The question lingered longer than it should have. Hannah had always been open about who she was, at least in theory. She didn't hide her sexuality, but she also didn't announce it. Years of navigating assumptions had taught her that disclosure was a negotiation, one she sometimes grew tired of participating in. With Claire, the question felt different. It wasn't fear that held her back from imagining more, it was restraint. A quiet voice reminding her that hope, once allowed to grow, was difficult to contain. Hannah had learned to protect herself not by closing off, but by choosing carefully where she placed her attention. And yet, late one evening, she caught herself standing in her kitchen, wine glass forgotten on the counter, staring out the window and thinking of Claire's smile. The realization unsettled her. She hadn't felt this way in years, not this gentle pull, not this low-grade ache that asked nothing and promised nothing in return. It felt less like desire and more like recognition delayed, as if something she hadn't known she was missing had briefly been returned to her and then taken away again. She wondered, not for the first time, whether she should have asked for Claire's number. The thought stayed with her long into the night. In bed, Hannah lay awake, listening to the city breathe around her. She thought about all the times she had mistaken urgency for truth, all the times she had rushed towards something because she was afraid of losing it. This felt different. Quieter. Almost patient. That was what frightened her. Because patience implied possibility. And possibility implied choice. Eventually, sleep came, but it was restless. In her dreams, Hannah stood in the bookshop again, reaching for a book that wasn't there, while someone watched her from just beyond the shelves. When she woke, the feeling remained. Wanting, she realized, didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waited, shapeless, persistent, until you were brave enough to look directly at it. Absence, Hannah had learned, was rarely empty. It had weight. Texture. It pressed in around the edges of a day, shaping thoughts without ever fully announcing itself. She noticed it in the spaces between tasks, in the moments when her attention wandered without invitation. It was there when she reached for her phone with no one in mind to call. When she lingered over coffee she didn't need to drink slowly. Claire's absence had begun to feel oddly specific. Hannah did not say Claire's name aloud, not even to herself, but it echoed anyway, softly, persistently, threaded through her routines. The memory of her presence in the bookshop had grown more vivid with time rather than less, as though the mind, denied repetition, had decided to preserve the moment carefully. She told herself this was normal. A harmless fixation. A story the mind told itself to pass the time. Still, she found herself returning to the bookshop. Not every day. That would have been too obvious, too intentional. Instead, she folded it into her life casually, the way one might begin taking a different street without admitting why. Sometimes she went in and out quickly, pretending to browse before leaving again. Other times she stayed longer, letting the quiet soothe her. Claire was never there. The woman at the counter began to recognize Hannah, greeting her with a nod that suggested familiarity. Hannah wondered, briefly, whether Claire was a regular in the same way, whether she too had become a quiet fixture in someone else's peripheral vision. The thought unsettled her. At night, Hannah's dreams grew more vivid. She dreamed of conversations that never quite reached their end, of questions that went unasked. She dreamed of standing in crowded rooms and finding Claire across them, always just out of reach, always watching. In the mornings, she woke with the faint ache of disappointment, the kind that faded quickly but left a trace. She began to question herself. This was not how she behaved anymore. She had built her life carefully, brick by brick, choosing stability over volatility, solitude over longing. She had learned to be content with her own company, to find satisfaction in work and friendships that did not demand too much. So why now? The question followed her through the week, surfacing unexpectedly in the middle of lectures and conversations. She found herself less present with friends, nodding along while her thoughts drifted elsewhere. One evening, over dinner with her closest friend, Miriam, Hannah laughed at something she hadn't fully heard. "You're somewhere else," Miriam said, narrowing her eyes. "That's new." Hannah hesitated. She considered deflecting, making a joke of it. Instead, she said carefully, "I met someone." Miriam's eyebrows rose. "Met someone how?" Briefly, Hannah replied. "Once." "And yet," Miriam said, smiling. "Here we are." Hannah smiled back, but there was tension beneath it. "It doesn't mean anything." "Of course not," Miriam said easily. "But it might." The word landed heavily between them. Later, walking home alone, Hannah replayed the conversation. She resented how easily Miriam had named what Hannah herself had been trying not to. Might was a dangerous word. It opened doors Hannah had learned to keep closed. She reached her building and paused before going inside, rain dampening her coat once again. The city lights blurred softly, familiar and distant all at once. She thought of Claire then, not as a possibility, but as a presence that had altered something fundamental in her. The absence was no longer neutral. It had begun to ask questions of her, to demand attention. 2 weeks passed. And then, on an ordinary Thursday evening, Hannah saw her. It happened so suddenly that Hannah almost didn't trust her own eyes. She was stepping off the bus when she noticed a familiar figure across the street, half hidden by the flow of people. The same loose hair. The same way of standing, weight shifted slightly to one side. Claire. Hannah's heart leapt, sharp and immediate. For a moment, she froze, watching as Claire spoke to someone beside her. Laughter, yes, that was the same laugh, Hannah was sure of it now. The recognition was instant, undeniable. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. Claire turned, scanning the street, and their eyes met again. This time, the moment cracked open. Claire's face lit up with surprise and something else Hannah recognized too late as relief. She raised a hand instinctively, as though afraid Hannah might disappear if she didn't anchor her somehow. "Hannah," she said, crossing the street quickly. "I was hoping I'd see you again." The words settled into Hannah like a confession. "I thought I imagined you," Hannah admitted, the truth escaping before she could stop it. Claire smiled, softer now. "I hoped I didn't." They stood there, traffic rushing around them, the city moving impatiently past as if their stillness were an inconvenience. "You live around here?" Hannah asked, grasping for something neutral, something safe. "Close enough," Claire replied. "I was starting to think that bookshop was our only shared geography." Hannah laughed, surprised by the warmth in her own chest. "I wondered that too." The coincidence felt too precise to dismiss, yet too ordinary to explain. It hovered between them, unspoken but acknowledged. "Can I?" Claire hesitated, then took a breath. "Can I buy you a coffee? Or is that too forward?" Hannah didn't hesitate this time. Coffee would be perfect. They walked together, steps falling easily into rhythm, conversation resuming as if it had merely been paused rather than interrupted. Hannah noticed how quickly her body relaxed in Claire's presence, how the tension she hadn't known she was carrying eased. As they sat across from each other in the cafe, steam rising between them, Hannah felt the shape of wanting shift again, becoming less abstract, more real. Absence, she realized, had not diminished what she felt. It had clarified it. The cafe was louder than Hannah would have chosen on her own. Milk steamed behind the counter, cups clinked against saucers, voices overlapped in a low, constant murmur. Normally, she found places like this distracting. Too much movement. Too much noise. But sitting across from Claire, the chaos softened, receding into something like background music. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug, shoulders relaxed now, as though the simple act of sitting together had released a tension Hannah hadn't noticed before. "I can't believe we ran into each other like that," Claire said. "Twice." Hannah smiled. "I'm starting to suspect the universe has opinions." Claire laughed. Or at least a sense of humor. They talked easily, slipping back into the rhythm they had established weeks ago in the bookshop. Books, again, and then work. Claire worked in archives, preserving old documents, a job Hannah found immediately charming. It explained the ink on her hands, the reverence with which she treated paper. "I like things that last," Claire said, almost apologetically. Things people thought were worth saving. Hannah felt something shift at that, a subtle alignment. "Me too," she said, surprised by how true it felt. They spoke about the city, where they lived, the neighborhoods they liked best. Claire lived close enough that Hannah could picture the overlap now, the invisible circles their lives had been drawing around each other without meeting. "No wonder we keep crossing paths," Hannah said. Claire tilted her head. Do you think it's coincidence? The question hung between them, gentle but deliberate. I think, Hannah said carefully, that coincidence is sometimes just meaning we don't understand yet. Claire's eyes held hers, thoughtful. I like that. The conversation deepened gradually, moving from the external to the personal in that careful way Hannah had learned to appreciate. They spoke about family, Claire's complicated relationship with hers, Hannah's distance from her own. About relationships that had shaped them and those that had left quiet scars. Claire listened intently, not interrupting, asking questions that felt considered rather than curious. You're very careful, Claire observed at one point. Hannah blinked. Am I? Yes, Claire said gently. Not closed. Just, measured. Hannah smiled ruefully. I've learned the hard way. Claire nodded, as if she understood more than Hannah had said. When they finally stood to leave, the light outside had shifted. Evening had crept in unnoticed, softening the edges of the street. They lingered by the door. I'm glad we ran into each other again, Claire said. Me too, Hannah replied. This time, she didn't qualify it. Claire hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Can I give you my number? In case the universe takes a break. Hannah laughed, relief washing through her. I was hoping you'd ask. Their fingers brushed as Claire handed her the phone, the contact saved quickly, almost ceremonially. The touch was brief, but it lingered, electric and restrained. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. I'll text you, Claire said. I'll look forward to it, Hannah replied. Walking home, Hannah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The wanting that had been shapeless and distant now had direction. It still didn't demand anything, but it felt closer, more possible. Later that night, her phone buzzed. Claire, I'm glad we didn't let that be a one-time thing. Hannah smiled, fingers hovering over the screen before replying. Hannah, me too. She set the phone down, heart steady and warm. Coincidences, she thought, were often just beginnings wearing disguises. Hannah had always believed that voices revealed more than faces. Faces could be arranged, smiles practiced, expressions controlled. Voices, though, betrayed hesitation, warmth, the small pauses where meaning hid. She listened for these things instinctively, the way some people watched hands or eyes. Claire's voice, she discovered, changed depending on the time of day. In text messages, it was thoughtful and precise, sentences carefully shaped but never stiff. Claire chose her words the way she handled old paper, with care, with respect. She asked questions that invited rather than demanded answers. Hannah found herself responding more openly than she intended, sharing details she usually kept folded away. Their texting began casually. A book recommendation here. An observation about the weather there. But soon it developed a rhythm, good mornings, lingering exchanges in the evenings, messages sent without a clear purpose beyond connection. One night, after a particularly long day, Hannah stared at her phone, unsure whether to cross a line she hadn't quite defined yet. Do you want to talk? She typed, then erased. Are you free? Erased again. Before she could overthink it, her phone buzzed. Claire, would it be strange if I called you? Hannah smiled. Not strange at all. The phone rang almost immediately. Hi, Claire said, her voice softer than Hannah had imagined. Hi, Hannah replied, suddenly aware of how quiet her flat felt. There was a brief pause, comfortable, unhurried. I wasn't sure, Claire admitted. Texts are easier. Less exposed. I know, Hannah said. But I like this. So do I. They talked for nearly an hour. About their days. About small frustrations and small victories. Claire told Hannah about a document she'd discovered at work, a letter hidden inside a book, written decades earlier, never sent. Hannah told Claire about a student who had surprised her with insight. Listening to Claire speak, Hannah noticed the subtle shifts, the way her voice grew animated when she spoke about history, the quiet laughter that followed self-deprecating comments. It felt intimate in a way Hannah hadn't experienced in a long time. After they hung up, Hannah sat in the dark, phone still warm in her hand. She realized something then. She was no longer waiting for something to happen. It was happening. Over the following weeks, their connection deepened in small, deliberate ways. Calls replaced texts more often than not. They began to recognize each other's moods before they were named. When Hannah was tired, Claire slowed the conversation, filled the silence gently. When Claire was anxious, Hannah listened without trying to fix anything. They met for walks, then dinners. Always with an ease that felt earned rather than accidental. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights reflected in dark water, Claire stopped suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Hannah turned to face her. "Of course." Claire hesitated. "Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something? Like one step forward would change everything?" Hannah felt the truth of it settle between them. "Yes," she said quietly. "All the time." Claire nodded, as if that was enough. They stood there, close but not touching, the space between them charged and careful. Hannah felt the familiar instinct to hold back, to preserve the equilibrium they had built. But she also felt something else. A willingness. As they parted that night, Claire leaned in, hesitating just long enough for Hannah to decide. Hannah closed the distance. The kiss was brief, more a promise than an act, but it carried weight. Claire's lips were warm, her breath unsteady. "Good night," Claire whispered, resting her forehead briefly against Hannah's. "Good night," Hannah replied, heart pounding. Walking home, Hannah realized she had crossed a threshold she could not retreat from. She didn't want to. Learning Claire's voice, she understood now, meant learning its absence would matter. And that changed everything. The space between hands, Hannah discovered, could hold an entire history. It was there when they walked side by side, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, sending quiet sparks up Hannah's spine. It was there when they sat across from each other at tables too small for distance to feel accidental. It was there in every moment they chose not to touch, even when touching would have been the easier thing. Restraint, Hannah knew, was not the absence of desire. It was desire given shape. After the kiss, nothing was said directly about what it meant. They didn't dissect it, didn't rush to define it. Instead, they let it settle naturally into their interactions, changing the temperature without changing the rhythm. But Hannah felt it everywhere. She felt it when Claire laughed and leaned just a little closer than necessary. When Claire's gaze lingered on her mouth before returning politely to her eyes. When Hannah caught herself imagining the weight of Claire's hand in hers and had to remind herself to breathe. They were careful, both of them. That care felt mutual, negotiated without words. Hannah recognized it as something precious, two people moving slowly not because they were unsure, but because they were certain enough to wait. Still, the waiting was not easy. One evening, Claire invited Hannah over for dinner. "Nothing fancy," she'd said. "Just pasta and too much garlic." Hannah arrived with a bottle of wine and a nervousness she hadn't felt in years. Claire's flat was small and warm, filled with books and plants and the faint scent of citrus soap. It felt unmistakably lived in. Claire moved easily in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely back. Hannah leaned against the counter, watching her without pretending otherwise. "You can sit," Claire said, smiling. "You don't have to supervise." "I like watching you," Hannah replied, then froze, surprised by her own honesty. Claire paused, turned, and met her gaze. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. "Good," Claire said softly. They ate at a small table near the window, knees brushing occasionally. Conversation flowed, punctuated by silences that felt deliberate rather than awkward. After dinner, they moved to the sofa, wine glasses in hand. The city hummed faintly outside. Claire sat close enough now that Hannah could feel her warmth. The space between their hands rested on the cushion like a question neither had yet answered. "I've been thinking," Claire said quietly. Hannah's pulse quickened. About? About how carefully we're doing this. Hannah nodded. Is that a complaint? No, Claire said quickly. It's a relief. And also terrifying. Hannah smiled. That sounds right. Claire set her glass down. Her hands shifted slightly, close enough that Hannah could feel the heat of it. I don't want to rush you, Claire said. Or myself. But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel this. She gestured vaguely between them. Hannah swallowed. Neither do I. For a moment, neither moved. Then Claire reached out, slowly, deliberately, and rested her hand over Hannah's. The contact was simple. It felt monumental. Hannah's breath caught as warmth spread through her palm, grounding and electric all at once. Claire's thumb brushed lightly against her skin, a touch so gentle it felt almost reverent. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, saying nothing. The intimacy of it overwhelmed Hannah in a way she hadn't anticipated. This was not hunger or urgency. This was presence. Permission. A shared understanding that whatever came next would be intentional. When Claire finally leaned in to kiss her, it was unhurried. Their mouths met softly, then deepened, learning pressure and rhythm. Hannah felt Claire's other hand rest at her waist, steady and warm. The kiss lingered, slow and consuming. When they parted, both were breathless. Claire rested her forehead against Hannah's. Is this okay? She asked quietly. Yes, Hannah replied immediately. More than okay. They didn't go further that night. Instead, they stayed there, touching occasionally, hands, shoulders, knees, letting closeness be enough. Hannah realized, with a sense of quiet wonder, that she felt safe. Not guarded. Not braced for loss. Just present. Later, walking home under a sky heavy with stars she rarely noticed, Hannah understood something essential. Desire didn't always demand fulfillment. Sometimes, it asked for patience. And sometimes, the space between hands was where love learned how to last.